Welcome back to NBC Update channel. Today, we will learn about the critical and deeply troubling questions surrounding Rachel Black's future after committing such devastating acts, nearly killing E.J. DiMera, attempting to harm Sarah Horton, and causing unimaginable trauma throughout Salem. Will Rachel ever be able to forgive herself? And more importantly, what kind of punishment awaits a child who has taken such dark actions? The upcoming 2 weeks of Days of Our Lives promise explosive revelations as Rachel's deeply buried secrets threaten to resurface, potentially destroying what little remains of her fractured psyche and forcing everyone in Salem to confront an impossible question. How do you punish a child for crimes committed in trauma and confusion? Rachel's dangerous obsession with Brady and Sarah. The tension in Salem reaches a boiling point as Rachel Black becomes increasingly paranoid about her father Brady's growing closeness with Sarah Horton Kiriakis. Rachel has always exhibited possessive tendencies when it comes to her parents, particularly her father, and her violent history of targeting anyone who threatens to come between Brady and her mother Kristen has been well documented throughout the years. Now, with Xander and Sarah's divorce proceedings moving forward at full speed during the weeks of November 17th to 28th, Rachel's worst fears seem to be materializing right before her eyes. Brady appears to be moving on with Sarah, and Rachel simply cannot allow that to happen. The young girl's obsession with keeping her parents together has already led to devastating consequences in the past, including the threatening text messages she sent to Ava Vitali in a calculated attempt to drive her away from Brady's life, demonstrating that Rachel is capable of far more manipulation and cruelty than most people realize. Xander's fury and the divorce papers. Xander Kiriakis finds himself consumed by rage. He witnesses Brady Black actively pursuing his wife, despite the fact that Sarah has made it abundantly clear she wants to end their marriage once and for all. The volatile Scotsman's anger reaches unprecedented levels when he confronts Brady about his intentions towards Sarah, accusing him of swooping in like a vulture while his marriage crumbles to pieces. However, Brady refuses to back down from Xander's intimidation tactics, coolly reminding him that he no longer has any right whatsoever to dictate who Sarah spends time with or what decision she makes about her personal life now that she has filed for divorce. This brutal reality check forces Xander to accept the painful truth that his marriage to Sarah is truly over, leading to a heartbreaking scene where the former couple meets to sign the official divorce papers that will legally and permanently close this devastating chapter of their relationship. The moment represents the final nail in the coffin for a couple that once seemed destined to overcome any obstacle, but Xander's pattern of lies, violence, and betrayal has finally pushed Sarah past the point of no return, leaving her with no choice but to walk away from the man she once loved with all her heart. The pistachio ice cream incident. The weekly promo for Days of Our Lives reveals an absolutely terrifying medical emergency that will leave Brady Black completely shaken and questioning everything he thought he knew about his daughter's mental state. The dramatic footage shows Sarah struggling desperately to breathe, gasping for air as panic sets in, while Brady demands answers from Rachel with the chilling question, "Rachel, what did you do?" The context clues scattered throughout the promo suggest that Rachel has deliberately given Sarah an ice cream sundae topped with pistachios, despite being fully aware of Sarah's severe and potentially life-threatening allergy to the nut. The calculated cruelty of this action cannot be overstated. Rachel has essentially attempted to murder Sarah in plain sight, using her medical knowledge gained through their previous interactions to weaponize Sarah's vulnerability against her. The ice cream sundaes visible on the table in the preview footage serve as innocent-looking instruments of Rachel's malicious intent, transformed into deadly weapons through the addition of pistachio toppings that could trigger fatal anaphylactic shock in someone with Sarah's sensitivity level. This deliberate attempt on Sarah's life demonstrates just how far Rachel is willing to go to eliminate any perceived threats to her fantasy of reuniting her parents. And it raises serious questions about whether Rachel is even capable of understanding the full consequences of her actions, or if she has crossed into territory where she genuinely does not care if people die as long as she gets what she wants. Sarah's health crisis and medical intervention. Following Rachel's deliberate poisoning attempt, Sarah Horton finds herself in the midst of a terrifying medical emergency as her body goes into anaphylactic shock from the pistachio exposure. The allergic reaction happens rapidly, with Sarah's airways beginning to close as her immune system launches a massive and potentially fatal response to the allergen coursing through her bloodstream. Brady immediately recognizes the severity of the situation and springs into action, calling for emergency medical assistance while trying to keep Sarah conscious and breathing until help arrives. The chaos that erupts in the aftermath of this incident sends shockwaves through everyone present, as witnesses struggle to comprehend how Rachel could have done something so calculated and cruel to someone who has only ever tried to help her. Fortunately, Sarah receives prompt medical attention from emergency responders who administer epinephrine and other critical interventions that save her life, allowing her to stabilize and eventually make a full recovery from the frightening ordeal. However, while Sarah's physical health may return to normal, the psychological and emotional trauma of being deliberately targeted for murder by a child will leave lasting scars that cannot be healed with medicine or time alone. The incident also forces everyone in Salem to confront the uncomfortable reality that Rachel Black is not simply acting out or going through a difficult phase. She is genuinely dangerous and poses a serious threat to anyone she perceives as standing in the way of her goals. Rachel's pattern of targeting Brady's love interests. Longtime Days of Our Lives fans will immediately recognize Rachel's attack on Sarah as part of a deeply disturbing pattern of behavior that has defined the troubled young girl's interactions with her father's romantic partners for years. Rachel has consistently demonstrated an absolute refusal to accept any woman in Brady's life who is not her mother, Kristen, viewing each new relationship as a personal betrayal and threat to her family unity. This possessive attachment has manifested in increasingly dangerous ways over time, starting with psychological manipulation tactics like the threatening text messages sent to Ava Vitali, which were specifically designed to terrorize the woman into abandoning her relationship with Brady out of fear for her safety. Now, with the pistachio incident targeting Sarah, Rachel has escalated from psychological warfare to actual attempted murder, crossing a line that many believed a child her age would be incapable of crossing. The progression from threats to physical violence suggests that Rachel's mental health has deteriorated significantly, possibly as a result of the trauma she has experienced watching her mother be imprisoned, losing access to her beloved grandmother Rachel Blake after EJ sent the elder woman away, and carrying the crushing secret that she was the one who shot EJ DiMera that fateful night. Each new perceived threat to her parents' relationship seems to trigger Rachel's fight or flight response, except her version of fight involves eliminating the threat through any means necessary, regardless of the moral or legal consequences. The connection between Sarah's crisis and Rachel's repressed memory. The most psychologically fascinating aspect of the pistachio poisoning incident is how it may serve as the catalyst that finally unlocks Rachel's repressed memories of shooting EJ DiMera months earlier. As Rachel watches Sarah struggle to breathe and witnesses the absolute panic and terror on everyone's faces, including her father's, the scene may trigger powerful flashbacks to that traumatic night when she pulled the trigger and nearly killed her uncle. The psychological mechanism at work here is that Rachel's mind has been protecting her from the overwhelming guilt and horror of what she did to EJ by completely blocking out those memories. But experiencing a similar situation where she is directly responsible for someone else's life-threatening medical crisis could shatter those protective barriers and force the truth to come flooding back. Mental health experts have long understood that traumatic memory repression is an automatic defense mechanism that allows the mind to continue functioning when faced with unbearable emotional pain. But these memories do not simply disappear, they remain buried in the subconscious, waiting for the right trigger to bring them roaring back to the surface. For Rachel, watching Sarah nearly die by her own hand may be the equivalent of looking in a mirror and finally seeing herself clearly for the first time. Confronting the reality of what she did to EJ, and understanding on a visceral level just how close she came to murdering another human being. Will Rachel's memory finally return? Days of Our Lives spoilers have been teasing for months that Rachel's repressed memories of the EJ shooting will eventually resurface. And the pistachio incident may finally be the moment when that psychological dam breaks and the truth comes pouring out. Rachel has exhibited strange behavior around EJ ever since the shooting, feeling inexplicably uncomfortable in his presence without understanding why. And this discomfort is actually her subconscious mind trying to warn her about the terrible thing she did, even though her conscious mind has no access to those memories. The process of memory recovery in cases of traumatic repression is often sudden and overwhelming, with the individual experiencing vivid flashbacks that feel like they are reliving the original trauma all over again in real time. For Rachel, this could mean suddenly remembering every detail of that ninth argument she witnessed between EJ and Johnny. The way she picked up the gun, the deafening sound of the shot, the blood. EJ collapsing to the ground, and the paralyzing fear that gripped her as she realized what she had done. Once these memories return, Rachel will have to grapple with the crushing weight of guilt and the knowledge that her mother Kristen is sitting in prison, taking the fall for a crime that Rachel herself committed. This revelation will force Rachel to make an impossible choice: continue living with the secret and allow her mother to serve time for her actions, or confess the truth and face whatever consequences await a child who has shot someone and then nearly killed another person through deliberate poisoning. Brady and Sarah's confrontation with Rachel. In the immediate aftermath of Sarah's allergic reaction, both Brady and Sarah will corner Rachel to demand answers about what exactly happened and why she gave Sarah something that she knew could kill her. Rachel may initially attempt to play innocent, claiming it was an accident or that she did not know about Sarah's allergy. But her father knows his daughter well enough to recognize when she is lying, and the evidence of premeditation is simply too strong to ignore. The confrontation will be emotionally devastating for Brady, who has spent years making excuses for Rachel's behavior and attributing her outbursts to the trauma of her mother's frequent incarcerations and the instability in her life. But this time he cannot deny that his daughter deliberately tried to murder someone in cold blood. Sarah, despite her near-death experience, may actually show more compassion and understanding than anyone expects, recognizing that Rachel is a deeply traumatized child who needs serious psychological help rather than simply punishment. However, Sarah will also make it absolutely clear that she cannot and will not tolerate being targeted for murder, and that Rachel must face real consequences for her actions if there is any hope of her understanding the severity of what she has done. The question of whether Brady and Sarah are just friends or something more will likely come up during this confrontation, with Rachel refusing to believe their protests and insisting that she saw the way they look at each other and knew that Sarah was trying to steal her father away from her mother. The looming question of punishment and accountability. This brings us to the central and most troubling question that Days of Our Lives will have to address in the coming weeks. What kind of punishment is appropriate for a child who has shot one person and deliberately tried to kill another through poisoning? The legal and ethical complexities of this situation are staggering, as Rachel is still a minor who has experienced significant trauma and whose actions may be the result of untreated mental illness rather than pure malevolence. However, the severity of her crimes cannot be ignored. Attempted murder is attempted murder, regardless of the perpetrator's age. And society has a fundamental obligation to protect innocent people from dangerous individuals. Some viewers will undoubtedly argue that Rachel belongs in a juvenile detention facility where she can be kept away from potential victims while receiving intensive psychiatric treatment, while others will insist that she is too young to be held criminally responsible and that forcing her into the legal system will only cause additional trauma that makes her behavior worse. The show's writers will have to walk a very delicate tightrope, acknowledging the seriousness of Rachel's actions while also recognizing her status as a child who has been failed by the adults in her life and who desperately needs help rather than pure punishment. Kristen's role in Rachel's fate. One crucial factor that will undoubtedly influence what happens to Rachel is her mother Kristen's involvement and her willingness to do absolutely anything to protect her daughter from facing legal consequences. Kristen has already demonstrated that she will sacrifice her own freedom to shield Rachel, having confessed to shooting EJ despite being completely innocent of that particular crime. And she will certainly fight tooth and nail to prevent Rachel from being sent to juvenile detention or facing any formal charges related to the pistachio poisoning attempt. However, Kristen's protective instincts may actually be part of the problem rather than part of the solution, as her history of making excuses for Rachel's behavior and failing to set appropriate boundaries has allowed the situation to escalate to this dangerous point. If Kristen had insisted on intensive therapy for Rachel after the threatening text message incident with Ava, or if she had been honest about the EJ shooting from the beginning instead of taking the fall herself, Rachel might have received the help she needed before attempting to murder Sarah. Now, the question becomes whether Kristen will finally recognize that protecting Rachel from consequences is actually hurting her daughter more than helping her, or whether she will continue down the same destructive path of enabling and cover-ups that has brought them to this crisis point. The impact on Brady's relationship with Rachel. For Brady Black, watching his daughter attempt to murder someone right in front of him represents a devastating turning point that will fundamentally alter his relationship with Rachel forever. Brady has always been a devoted and loving father who has tried his absolute best to provide stability and support for Rachel despite the chaos of co-parenting with Kristen and dealing with his own struggles with addiction and recovery. However, this incident forces him to confront the painful reality that love and good intentions are not enough when a child is as troubled and dangerous as Rachel has become, and that continuing to make excuses for her behavior is actually enabling her to hurt more people. Brady will have to make some incredibly difficult decisions in the coming weeks about what kind of relationship he can have with his daughter moving forward, whether he can trust her to be around other people unsupervised, and how to balance his natural desire to protect and nurture his child with his responsibility to protect potential victims from her violent impulses. The guilt and shame that Brady will experience as he processes what Rachel has done will be crushing, as he inevitably questions whether he somehow failed as a father or missed warning signs that could have prevented this tragedy. Sarah's perspective and potential forgiveness. Despite being the victim of Rachel's murderous intent, Sarah Horton may ultimately play a crucial role in determining what happens to the troubled young girl and whether there is any path forward toward healing and redemption. Sarah's background as a doctor gives her unique insight into the medical and psychological aspects of Rachel's behavior, and she may be able to see past the violence to the traumatized child underneath who is desperately crying out for help in the only way she knows how. This does not mean that Sarah will simply forgive and forget what Rachel did. That would be unrealistic and potentially dangerous, but she may advocate for Rachel to receive comprehensive psychiatric treatment rather than being thrown into the juvenile justice system, where she is likely to become even more damaged and violent. Sarah's own connection to Rachel through the baby swap storyline adds another layer of complexity to their relationship, as Sarah was Rachel's primary caregiver during the first months of her life before the truth came out about the switched babies. On some level, Sarah may feel a lingering sense of attachment and responsibility toward Rachel that makes it impossible for her to simply write the child off as irredeemable, even after everything that has happened. The broader implications for Salem. Rachel Black's escalating violence raises serious questions about the community of Salem as a whole and whether the town's residents have been too willing to overlook dangerous behavior and criminal activity in the name of protecting their own. The reality is that Rachel has been exhibiting warning signs of serious psychological problems for quite some time now, and yet the adults in her life have consistently failed to take appropriate action or insist on proper treatment because they were uncomfortable with the idea of labeling a child as dangerous or troubled. This pattern of denial and enabling extends far beyond Rachel's immediate family to include teachers, friends, and other community members who noticed concerning behavior but chose to look the other way rather than risk making waves or seeming judgmental. Now, with someone nearly dead as a result of Rachel's actions, everyone will have to confront the uncomfortable truth that protecting children sometimes means acknowledging when they need serious help and being willing to take difficult steps to ensure they get it, even if that means involving authorities or mental health professionals. Rachel's mental health and the path forward. At the heart of this entire tragedy is a deeply traumatized young girl who has experienced more pain and instability in her short life than most adults face in decades, and whose violent acting out is ultimately a symptom of untreated mental illness and unprocessed trauma. Rachel has watched her mother be sent to prison multiple times, has been used as a pawn in various schemes and power plays between adults, lost access to her beloved grandmother when EJ sent Rachel Blake away, and now carries the terrible secret that she shot her uncle and nearly killed him. The psychological burden of all of this trauma would be overwhelming for anyone, but for a child with a still developing brain and limited coping mechanisms, it has proven to be absolutely devastating and has warped her perception of right and wrong to the point where she genuinely believes that murdering people who threaten her family is an acceptable solution. The path forward for Rachel will require intensive, long-term psychiatric treatment that addresses not just her violent behavior but the underlying trauma that drives it, combined with serious accountability and consequences that help her understand the gravity of what she has done while still leaving room for eventual healing and rehabilitation. Will Rachel forgive herself? Perhaps the most important question is not what punishment Rachel will face from the legal system or how the adults in her life will respond, but whether Rachel will ever be able to forgive herself once she fully understands the magnitude of what she has done. When Rachel's repressed memories finally return and she remembers shooting EJ, combined with the fresh knowledge that she nearly killed Sarah through the pistachio poisoning, The psychological impact will be absolutely devastating for a child who is already struggling to cope with overwhelming trauma. The process of coming to terms with the fact that she is capable of such violence, that she nearly murdered two people, and that her actions have caused immeasurable pain to people she cares about may be more than Rachel's fragile psyche can handle without intensive professional support. Self-forgiveness is one of the most difficult psychological challenges that anyone can face. And it is exponentially more complicated when the actions requiring forgiveness include attempted murder and the knowledge that an innocent person, her mother Kristen, is sitting in prison taking the blame for Rachel's crime. Rachel will have to find a way to acknowledge her responsibility for what happened without being completely destroyed by guilt and shame. Learning to separate her actions from her inherent worth as a person and understanding that she can work toward becoming better even though she cannot undo the past. The coming weeks on Days of Our Lives will force viewers to grapple with these incredibly difficult questions about justice, mercy, mental health, and accountability as Rachel Black's story reaches its emotional climax and the people of Salem must decide how to respond to a child who has committed terrible crimes, but who is also clearly crying out for help in the most destructive way possible.